Hello everyone. Thank you for helping test out the Dark Forces character creator. I'll be doing more, formal documentation and a more thorough video walkthrough later on, but this is just to help people get started for those who want to help test it out at this earlier stage. So we've got the zip file. I've extracted it here. The .atn file, all that is a action preset for Photoshop. If you have Photoshop, that'll just trim the images as needed. There is an equivalent in GIMP. If you download the Batcher plugin, file, batch convert, and then GIMP image auto crop. And yeah, that should be it for what you need on that part of the process. So the process is load up the Blender file, pick what type of character you want, so what enemy type it is. As far as Dark Forces is concerned, change the look of the character, whether it's a Rhodian or a Stormtrooper or whatever. Render out those images, trim the images in Photoshop or GIMP, which is the only reason you've sort of got this bit here. Load the files into Wax Converter, and then export as a .wax. So I'll just close this for now and load our Blender file. It's a bit of a hefty Blender file, but shouldn't be too bad on most computers. It's just the file size with all the meshes. So if you've not used Blender before, you should be able to go to Edit, Preferences. I think I'm using a slightly older version of Blender, but that doesn't matter. The preferences are all roughly in the same spot. So under System, no, wait, sorry, save and load. Auto run Python scripts. So if you don't have this enabled, and I think it's off by default on a fresh install of Blender, two things won't happen. One, you won't get the Dark Forces script pop up, and secondly, there's controls on the character rig that won't work. So particularly if this is all you're using Blender for the moment anyway, just check the auto run Python scripts. The other thing to check while we're here is under that one's under system. Okay, so we want if your cycles render devices is set to none and you see options here, you'll need to pick one of these. CUDA is obviously a NVIDIA only thing. Optics works pretty well, but again, it'll depend on your hardware. Blender will be able to do its fancy cycles ray tracing, which you can see in the render engine over here. If you are, only using the CPU, it's just if you enable the GPU, it's going to go a lot quicker. So, that's highly recommended stuff. I'm running a RTX 3060 Ti. You don't need a card that powerful because this is only going to take a couple of minutes to render anyway. Mostly because we're just relatively simple file, and the resolution of the images is going to be pretty small. So just getting that out of the way first. So the sort of first thing you're going to want to do to be able to see the character better is we've got these different, wireframe, shader view, preview, which will work, but not great. It'll take a while to sort of compile the shaders, and then the shaders won't be super accurate to what you want. But what you do want is this viewport shading on the end here. So we've got fairly snazzy looking Rhodian. If we hit the F12 button, or if you're on a Mac, render image, because you may not have an F12 button, and then that's how long it takes to get one frame. Most of these are around 100 frames. So as you can imagine, it's not that long of a process to get the whole render out. But while you're getting the look of the character, you probably only want to do one frame at a time rather than render the entire sequence every time you just change something. However, this, in viewport preview, and I'm just clicking the middle mouse button to sort of rotate around, and the numpad 0 to sort of get back to where we were, i.e. the camera view. You can rely, as you can sort of see between one to the other, you can rely on this like render viewport shading anyway, to be able to give you sort of the colors it's going to come out as. So quick tour of the script. First thing you're going to want to do at any point is select an animation set. So this is where we've got troop, which is basically standard stormtrooper replacement, re-ease, and they've got an animation for punch and for a grenade. 4 different sort of idle animations, which was sort of seen all over Prelude to Harkov's Defection in particular. Probe Droid, which is a replacement for both the Probe Droid and the Dark Trooper, but there's some issues with the Dark Trooper hitbox thing, so only effectively use that to replace Probe Droids unless you sort of specifically know what you're doing. Feel free to experiment and test, but so far the tests haven't been great for the Dark Trooper in that regard. Boba Fett is a straight Boba Fett replacement, except now with a rocket launcher instead of a little gun that shoots rockets. Gamguard, which I'll just quickly show to give you an example here, gives you an electric staff. So with the electric staff, the examples I've been posting on the forums have Fulbrights. So there is a extra toggle here specifically for this setup of Fulbright on or Fulbright off. And you can see what that does to the sort of the render. It'll dull anything that's not. I'll just preview render it again here with the F12. It'll keep the brightness of anything that's meant to be full bright and deliberately darken and desaturate everything else slightly. This is because there's no real way to tell Wax Converter, yes, only these pixels. It's purely just a brightness thing. This is under experimental options because while that is working fairly well, it's going to need a little bit of tweaking in the future to work, nicer. Anyway, that option is there. Use it if you would like. So back to the animation sets. We've also got Unarmed Walk, which is for sort of civilian characters. Came up with that one for the sort of Crix Maydeen character, so now Crix can walk around once you've rescued him and everything. But again, this is also something that could be useful for civilian characters, mission givers, people who aren't going to shoot you in your level. So some people might use that, some might not. Fusion Cutter gives you a weapon with a Fusion Cutter. Clearly, this isn't a default enemy type, so any sort of weapon change you do visually, if you just bring it back into Dark Forces normally, they're just going to shoot whatever standard projectile you give them. So Stormtrooper would be the red laser blast, unless you use the custom logic files. That's a whole other thing. Won't be covering that in this video, but the art for it is there. So Fusion Cutter, and again, Mortar, Concussion Rifle, so that's your Bosk replacement. Pistol, so that's your officer replacement. And you can see it's switching between these pretty quickly. And then Repeater, which even with custom logics we probably can't use just yet, but I'd modeled the rest, so why not? For the purpose of this example, we'll just leave it as Troop, which will give them the standard gun. So obviously there's a lot of Stormtroopers and Imperial options as well, which some of you may have seen on the forums already. These UI panels can be collapsed and expanded, just if that helps things for clarity. So if we've got the standard alien here, we can do generate random alien. That will randomize everything. We can do random colors, which will only randomize the colors. All of these options have a tooltip, so that stuff's pretty self-explanatory. Human heads are a bit different because there's also the customization options for, hair and beards and everything. And, just whipping through them here, can individually change hair color, skin color, chiss for the sort of Thrawn aliens and everything. Or you can just randomly change their clothes, or just the top half of their clothes, or just the colors on the top half of their clothes. Anyway, so it deliberately gets more granular as you go along. There is also a few special cases here for, specifically having a Mandalorian. Um, you know, not nearly as many options for this as there are some of the other character types. It's more that, Mandalorian armor kind of only makes sense on Mandalorians because that's their whole deal. And come to think of it, I don't think the Tusken switching options are in. So there is art in here for multiple different Tusken variations. Um, it just looks like I haven't added that yet in terms of the script. So that will be, coming later, I guess. For the Imperial options, we can select a random Imperial here. So we've got a Juggernaut pilot, and he's got some red trim on his armor. This is because the mesh of each Imperial type will stay the same, because it's a pretty standardized uniform. But just to give them some variation, you can change the base color of each trooper, which will change the amount of grunge, obviously the base tint. You can then change the color of the trim on the armor. You can turn it off completely, which was a bad frame to show the example on, but anyway, you get the idea. And then you can also, there should be 5 different layout options for the trim. Or you can just keep doing random Imperial colors and it'll change the whole lot. So while there is also, random Imperial enemy, which will do exactly what it sounds like, that'll randomize what type it is, what colors, what trim colors. There is also obviously the option to say, I specifically want a Scout Trooper, thank you very much. And there you go. And then we can change the colors on our Scout. If you want a Imperial Trooper with a human head, just do that. I'm sure there are scenarios where you've busted into the barracks and they haven't put all the helmets on or whatever. It's just another layer of variety, to give people the option when they're customizing wax files for their levels. So we will go with this dude. The next step is to render out the image sequence. So, there's 2 options for this. I have added a render character animation button. Again, just so you don't have to learn the ins and outs of anything in Blender except this panel. Why that's under experimental options is if you click this, I only added this button this afternoon, it'll lock up the UI, render the entire image sequence, and then you get the UI access back when it's done, which for something like Maya is kind of, that's largely what it does anyway. But if we go render animation up the top here, it'll give us a bit more information and change the visuals as we go. And, because Blender is awesome, we can even keep looking at our character while we wait. This will render slightly slower because it's, obviously still rendering in the UI and everything anyway, but it will work. So just while we wait for that to wrap up, under render, okay, so keep this folder structure as is, or else you're going to have to do a lot more manual work to get this up and running. So within the render subfolder, a whole stack of different templates, total of 25 because, 22 because idle template takes 4 different types of animations. So we are rendering out troop left-handed. And within troop left-handed cells, we can see that it is one by one replacing, the commando example that I was using previously with our helmetless scout trooper. So almost done. Bam. Troop underscore LH underscore template dot cells. Leave that alone because troop underscore LH underscore template dot WPROJ is the wax converter folder, and it needs those there, and it needs them to be 000 numerically through 099, or 0 whatever the file list needs to be for the other troop types. So now that we've got this here, you can see all of these are square dimensions. This would work as a wax file, but two things. One, the hitbox is going to go to the edge of that square, so they're going to get stuck in doorways and be stupidly easy to shoot at. But more importantly, the wax converter template file, which I'll just sort of open wax converter and get things underway here. Create, build wax manually, common colors only because all of the files are designed to work with that. Load project, yep, that's fine. We want troop left-handed. So if I was to go position frames just to check everything's aligned, it won't be. So we want this character to be in the center. And for starters, I've loaded the wrong one. So create, build wax manually, load project, okay. Just go into the correct folder for this, which is troop lh underscore template. Open the template file. So what we can see here is, first of all, these two black dots just help a bit with alignment. Because they're completely black, they will be rendered as transparent. So if they're still in there, that part's not a problem. What is a problem, and we'll check common colors only because this is designed to work with that. That's okay. Position frames. All of these are going to be offset, and you don't want that. However, the reason they're offset is because each of these frames here has already been aligned to a certain value once the character's been trimmed in Photoshop. So we'll discard those changes for now. So in GIMP, if we go to batch convert, procedures, so I did add procedure, add custom procedure, search for GIMP image autocrop. That's the one just sort of we're going to need here. I will pick the folder that we're after, which in this case will be troop left-hand template, and then specifically the troop left-hand template cells, because that's where the actual PNGs are. Select that, do add folders, select folder, that'll add our image sequence so we can see that that's actually going to work, and click run. And apply action to all files, replace. If we have duplicates of everything, that's not going to work so nice. And if we check in our folder, we can see that GIMP is trimming all these images to a size that will work fine in Wax Converter. Most of the way there. And it's done frame 99 and we're good. So if we jump back into our Wax Converter project, don't change or save anything here, do load project, that's okay, load left-hand template. Now if we do position frames, again, just to check everything, everything is centered. The only thing that is off by a bit is the height of the character. So Jareth was kind enough to add the option for, we don't need that one. We can take all frames and say at 5% of the height, just, nudge them down a bit. And there we go. It's where we want it. You want the feet a little bit below the line. Otherwise, the effect is kind of broken with the whole 2D wax file thing. So frame 71 is often the death frame for a lot of these templates. You're just going to want to check that one because 5% of that is actually 5% of that frame there. So it's like our pixel. So that one we probably just want to move down to 15% of its height and just click current frame, just so it sits a little bit below the 0, and then click accept changes. So when I say minimum wax converter template tweaking, that's literally it. Everything else should be fine depending on what troop type you're using. Again, these little black dots will be marked, flagged by the program as transparent because they're 100% black. And so now, yeah, common colors only. If you're using full brights for the Gamorrean Guard replacements, you'd turn that on, but we're not. So now we can do create wax. And Trooper 1, very inventive. Save that. And there we go. That's it. That wax file can then be brought into the Force engine or Wodifuse, and you have your new enemy to play with. All the palette conversions, all the alignments, all the sequences, all already set up. And that's set up across the 22 different templates. So for the idle animations, for the different troop types, all ready to go. So if you've got any questions, let me know on the Discord. But that's it for the initial tour. Hopefully that's all up and running smoothly for you. Yeah, would love to see your creations. Okay, cheers. Bye.